"You don't look like someone who'd have this kind of money in their account." The words cut through the marble-floored lobby of First Capital Bank like a knife, sharp and deliberate. Amelia Richardson stood frozen at the teller window, her withdrawal slip still pinched between her fingers, as every pair of eyes in the bank lobby slowly turned toward her. The morning had started like any other Tuesday for Amelia Richardson. She'd woken at 5:30 a.m., completed her usual pre-dawn meditation, and spent 45 minutes on her Peloton before showering and preparing for the day ahead. Unlike most mornings, when she'd don a meticulously tailored suit for her executive role at First Capital Bank's headquarters, today was different. Today was her personal day, the one she'd scheduled 3 months ago to finalize the purchase of a property she'd been eyeing for nearly a year. Dressed in a simple gray t-shirt, jeans, and comfortable flats, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, she'd walked into First Capital Bank's downtown branch to make a routine transaction. The kind of errand most people wouldn't think twice about. The kind of errand that for Amelia always came with an added layer of awareness, an awareness born from a lifetime of experiences just like the one she was about to have. As she entered the bank, Amelia couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in atmosphere. It was barely perceptible. A momentary pause in conversations, a few lingering glances that lasted a beat too long. She was used to this, the silent assessment that seemed to follow her in certain spaces, spaces where people who looked like her weren't always expected to belong. The lobby was grand, with soaring ceilings and marble floors that echoed with each footstep. Ornate chandeliers hung overhead, casting a warm glow over the space. It was designed to impress, to convey stability and tradition. First Capital Bank had been an institution in the city for over a century, its reputation built on catering to a particular clientele, a clientele that, historically, hadn't included many people who looked like Amelia. She made her way to the teller stations, where a row of employees sat behind polished counters. Most were busy with customers, their interactions a practiced dance of pleasantries and transactions. Amelia surveyed the line, automatically doing what she'd learned to do from childhood, scanning for the face that might be most receptive to her. It was an unconscious calculation, a survival skill honed through years of navigating spaces where her presence wasn't always welcome. She chose the third window, where a man in his mid-30s with slicked-back hair and a perfectly pressed suit was finishing up with an elderly white couple. He smiled warmly at them, chatting about the weather and asking about their grandchildren as he processed their transaction. The couple laughed comfortably, clearly at ease in this environment, clearly feeling that they belonged. Amelia watched, wondering if that same warmth would extend to her. She'd learned long ago not to expect it, but she never stopped hoping to be proven wrong. As the couple moved away, Amelia stepped forward. The teller, Brandon Wells, according to his nameplate, looked up. His smile didn't quite fade, but it shifted, becoming more professional, less personal, more guarded. "Good morning," Amelia said, placing her ID and withdrawal slip on the counter. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." Brandon picked up the slip, and Amelia saw his eyebrows rise slightly as he registered the amount, $7,500 in cash. A significant sum, but not outlandish. Not for someone who needed to close on a property that afternoon. Not for someone who, like Amelia, had worked hard for every dollar in her account. She'd filled out the withdrawal slip carefully, requesting $7,500 in cash. The property seller was old school, preferred part of the down payment in cash. Amelia had tried to explain the benefits of a bank transfer, but Mr. Harrington, a 70-year-old widower selling his family home, had insisted. Cash in hand never fails, he'd told her, and Amelia, eager to secure the historic property in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, had agreed. She planned to convert it into affordable housing units and a community financial education center, a way to give back to the community she'd come from, even as she herself had climbed the corporate ladder. Brandon had taken one look at Amelia's form and smirked, the kind of smirk that spoke volumes without saying a word. It was a look Amelia knew well, the look that said, "You don't belong here. You don't fit the profile of what I expect to see." "ID, please," he'd asked, his tone already dripping with suspicion, despite the fact that Amelia had already placed her driver's license on the counter alongside the withdrawal slip. Amelia pushed her license closer to him without comment. She was used to this, the extra scrutiny, the sideways glances, the subtle tone shifts that came with being a black woman in spaces where people assumed she didn't belong. She'd navigated these waters her entire life, from prep school to Princeton to the corporate banking world. The settings changed, but the undercurrent of suspicion remained the same. Brandon studied her ID for longer than necessary, glancing between the photo and her face multiple times, as if trying to convince himself that the woman in the professional ID photo could possibly be the same person standing before him in casual clothes. Then he typed something into his computer, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "And how will you be using this cash today?" His voice was louder now, as if he wanted others to hear, as if he were performing diligence for an audience. Amelia kept her voice steady, determined not to show the frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "That's personal, but if you need to know for your records, I'm closing on a property purchase." Brandon's eyebrows shot up, disbelief evident in his expression. That's when he said it, the words that now hung in the air between them. "You don't look like someone who'd have this kind of money in their account." A woman in line behind Amelia gasped softly. An elderly man reading a newspaper in the waiting area looked up, frowning. The security guard by the door shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Amelia and the teller, unsure whether he should intervene. Amelia felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and weary resignation. It wasn't the first time she'd heard words like these. It wouldn't be the last, but something about today, perhaps the property closing she'd worked so hard for, perhaps the accumulated weight of 1,000 similar moments, made her unwilling to let this one pass. "Excuse me," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm, loud enough that those nearby could hear clearly. She wanted witnesses. She wanted this moment documented in the collective memory of everyone in that lobby. Brandon didn't back down. If anything, her challenge seemed to strengthen his resolve. "We have protocols for unusual transactions," he said, his tone condescending. "This doesn't match your usual banking pattern." Amelia took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her back, could sense the mixture of discomfort and curiosity emanating from those around her. Some would be sympathetic, she knew. Others would be wondering if perhaps the teller was right to be suspicious. She'd been in this position enough times to understand exactly how this scene was playing out in the minds of those watching. "I've been a customer here for 6 years, Amelia replied, keeping her voice level despite the anger coursing through her. She would not raise her voice. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of labeling her as aggressive or difficult. "And I've made larger withdrawals before." Brandon's smile tightened, becoming something closer to a grimace. "Perhaps at another branch," he said dismissively. "I don't recognize you as one of our regular customers." He slid her ID back across the counter, the gesture just short of rude. "I'll need to get my manager to approve this." Amelia checked her watch. 10:17 a.m. The property closing was at 2 p.m. She had time, but this unnecessary delay was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid by coming early. She'd planned her morning meticulously, accounting for traffic, for parking, for any reasonable wait time at the bank. What she hadn't factored in was having her identity and financial status questioned simply because she didn't look like someone who should have access to her own money. "Fine," she said, the word clipped. "Please get your manager." Brandon pressed a button beneath the counter, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face. As if he expected her to grab the cash and run, as if her mere presence at his window was suspicious, as if the very act of trying to access her own money was somehow fraudulent. As they waited, an uncomfortable silence fell over their corner of the lobby. Amelia could sense people watching from the periphery, some pretending to be absorbed in their phones or deposit slips, others openly staring. She kept her posture straight, her expression neutral. Years in corporate America had taught her the importance of maintaining composure, especially in situations where others might be looking for any sign of emotion to confirm their biases. The branch manager, Patricia Winters, emerged from a door behind the teller stations. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a navy blue suit that screamed authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being the final word, someone who rarely had her decisions questioned. She approached Brandon's window with a brisk efficiency, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Brandon leaned over and whispered something in her ear, nodding toward Amelia. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible pursing of the lips. Amelia recognized it immediately, the look of someone preparing to handle a situation. Patricia approached the window, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes already assessing, judging. "Good morning, ma'am. I understand there's an issue with your withdrawal." She didn't introduce herself, didn't offer her name or position. The omission was telling. "There shouldn't be," Amelia replied evenly. "I'm withdrawing $7,500 from my own account. I have proper identification and the funds are available." Patricia glanced at Amelia's withdrawal slip, then at the computer screen Brandon had turned toward her. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned whatever information was displayed there. "This is a significant amount of cash," Patricia said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. Her tone carried the same condescension that Brandon's had, but wrapped in a veneer of professional concern. "We have certain procedures for transactions of this size, especially when they're unusual for the account holder." Amelia felt heat rising in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. Years of board meetings and negotiations had prepared her for moments like this, moments when maintaining composure was more powerful than showing anger, no matter how justified that anger might be. "What exactly is unusual?" Amelia asked, her voice level. "The amount? Or the person making the withdrawal?" The question hung in the air, direct and unflinching. Amelia watched as Patricia's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of discomfort. The woman recovered quickly, but not before Amelia saw it, the recognition that her bias had been called out explicitly. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Richardson, we take security very seriously at First Capital. We're simply doing our due diligence." "Would you be doing this same due diligence if I were someone else?" Amelia asked, her voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Someone who fit your image of what a First Capital customer should look like?" Patricia's smile vanished entirely now, replaced by a tight expression that bordered on hostility. "I'm going to need you to verify some additional information," she said, ignoring Amelia's question entirely. "Could you tell me the last 3 transactions on this account?" It was a test, and they both knew it. A test designed to catch someone who might have gained fraudulent access to the account. A test that assumed guilt rather than innocence. A test that wouldn't have been administered to every customer requesting a withdrawal. Amelia recited them without hesitation, her memory impeccable, a skill honed through years of meetings where she couldn't afford to forget a single detail. A $142.87 charge at Whole Foods 3 days ago. A $1,200 rent payment to Highland Properties last week. A $329 purchase at Best Buy 10 days ago. Patricia looked slightly surprised but quickly recovered. Her test had failed to expose Amelia as a fraud, but she wasn't ready to concede. And could you verify your current address and phone number? Amelia provided both correctly, maintaining eye contact the entire time. She would not be looked through. She would not be diminished. I see, Patricia said, her tone unchanged despite Amelia having correctly answered every question. And what did you say this cash was for again? I didn't say, Amelia replied, a subtle reminder that she wasn't obligated to explain her financial decisions to anyone. But since you're asking, I'm closing on a property purchase this afternoon. The seller requested partial payment in cash. Patricia exchanged a look with Brandon, a silent communication that Amelia interpreted immediately. They still didn't believe her, or rather, they didn't want to believe her. Her explanation was reasonable, logical, and common enough, but it didn't fit the narrative they had constructed about her from the moment she stepped up to that window. That sounds potentially suspicious, Patricia said, her voice dropping slightly, adopting a tone of faux concern. We have an obligation to report unusual transactions that might indicate illegal activity. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Cash transactions of this size could be associated with money laundering, tax evasion, or other financial crimes. Patricia wasn't directly accusing Amelia of these things, but the insinuation was unmistakable. Amelia took a slow, deep breath, willing herself to remain calm despite the growing outrage she felt. This was beyond poor customer service. This was beyond unconscious bias. This was explicit discrimination, happening in broad daylight, in front of a lobby full of witnesses. Are you suggesting I'm involved in something illegal because I'm withdrawing my own money from my own account? Amelia asked, each word precise and measured. No one is accusing you of anything, Patricia said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. But surely you understand our position. We don't normally see people making cash withdrawals of this size without prior notice. People. The word lingered, its meaning transparent. People like you. The implication couldn't have been clearer if Patricia had spelled it out. The lobby had grown uncomfortably quiet. Everyone was watching now, the morning bank business temporarily suspended as the drama unfolded. Amelia was acutely aware of being the center of attention, of having her dignity and legitimacy questioned in public. It was a familiar feeling, one that never became easier to bear no matter how many times she experienced it. I'd like to speak with someone else, Amelia said finally, her patience wearing thin but her composure still intact. Perhaps someone higher up the chain. Patricia's smile returned, cold and confident. I'm the branch manager, Ms. Richardson. There is no one else here with more authority than me. The statement was delivered with finality, with the certainty of someone used to being the last word. Someone who had likely dismissed complaints like Amelia's before. Someone who had never faced consequences for doing so. Then I'd like the contact information for your regional director, Amelia said, reaching into her purse. The mention of a higher authority caused Patricia's posture to stiffen. People like Patricia rarely expected to be challenged. They operated within systems designed to protect them. Systems that discouraged customers from escalating complaints, systems that made accountability optional rather than mandatory. That won't be necessary, Patricia said quickly, suddenly less certain than she had been moments before. let me check something else. She turned back to the computer, typing quickly, perhaps looking for some other reason to deny Amelia's transaction, some other policy to hide behind. As Patricia scrolled through whatever information she was seeing, her expression changed subtly. The confidence began to drain from her face, replaced by something closer to uncertainty. Her typing became more frantic, her eyes widening slightly as she processed whatever was on the screen. "One moment," she said, stepping away from the counter and gesturing for Brandon to follow her. They huddled near the manager's office, speaking in hushed tones and occasionally glancing back at Amelia. Their body language had shifted dramatically. Uncertainty had crept in where confidence had stood moments before. Something had changed, and Amelia knew exactly what it was. They had finally looked beyond the surface, beyond her casual clothes and her race, and seen the complete picture. They had seen her account history, her transaction patterns, and perhaps, most importantly, they had seen her position within the bank. When they returned, Patricia's smile seemed more genuine, though tension still pulled at the corners of her eyes. "Ms. Richardson, I apologize for the delay. We'll process your withdrawal immediately." Her voice had softened considerably, the condescension replaced by something approaching deference. "What changed?" Amelia asked, not moving, not willing to let them off the hook so easily. Patricia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direct question. "Nothing changed. We've simply completed our verification process." "Really?" Amelia reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a small business card. "Because I think something definitely changed when you looked more closely at my account." She slid the card across the counter. Patricia picked it up, her face draining of color as she read it. "Amelia Richardson, Executive Vice President, First Capital Bank, Corporate Oversight Division." Brandon leaned over to see the card, his mouth falling open slightly. "Oh," Patricia said faintly, the single syllable carrying the weight of sudden, terrible understanding. "Yes. Oh." Amelia's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the softness now. "I normally work at the corporate headquarters on Madison Avenue. I'm actually in charge of branch operations and customer experience for the entire Northeast region. That includes this branch, Ms. Winters." The silence in the lobby was absolute. Someone dropped a pen, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Amelia could feel the collective intake of breath from everyone within earshot. The shock, the realization, the dramatic reversal of power that had just occurred. "Ms. Richardson, I had no idea," Patricia began, her voice suddenly tremulous. "Clearly," Amelia cut her off. "Now I'd still like to make my withdrawal, and afterward I think we should have a conversation in your office. I'm particularly interested in discussing how you determine which customers deserve extra scrutiny when making perfectly legitimate transactions with their own money." Patricia nodded quickly, her professional composure crumbling in the face of this unexpected development. "Of course, Brandon will process your withdrawal immediately." Brandon's hands trembled slightly as he counted out the cash. No one spoke as he carefully placed the bills in an envelope and handed it to Amelia along with a receipt. His earlier confidence had vanished completely, replaced by the nervous deference of someone who suddenly realized they had made a career-altering mistake. "Thank you," Amelia said, tucking the envelope into her purse. She signed the receipt with a flourish, her signature bold and clear, a signature that appeared on bank documents, on policy changes, on performance reviews. "Now shall we?" She gestured toward Patricia's office. As they walked away from the counter, Amelia could feel the eyes of every customer and employee following her. The whispers had already begun. The story would spread throughout the day, throughout the week. The black woman they'd tried to deny service was actually their boss. It was the kind of reversal that people loved to share, that would become bank lore, that would be retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always with the same essential truth. Someone had been judged by their appearance and found wanting, only for the judges to discover they'd made a terrible mistake. But Amelia wasn't interested in humiliation or revenge. What happened next wouldn't be about public shaming. It would be about accountability and change. Real, systematic change. Because 15 minutes from now, she wouldn't just be sitting in the branch manager's office. She'd be calling a meeting of the entire executive leadership team. And by the end of the day, First Capital Bank would never be the same. Amelia Richardson had grown accustomed to being underestimated. At 37, she'd spent nearly 2 decades watching people's expressions shift. When they learned her position, her credentials, her authority, the surprise quickly masked the recalibration, the sudden respect that should have been there from the beginning. It had started in college. The shocked faces when she aced exams in advanced finance courses. The professors who suggested maybe she'd be more comfortable in a different major when she chose finance and economics at Princeton. The career counselor who steered her toward more suitable positions when she expressed interest in investment banking. Perhaps something in HR or marketing, the counselor had suggested, not even trying to hide her doubt that Amelia could succeed in the competitive world of high finance. Those fields tend to be more welcoming to candidates with your background. My background? Amelia had asked, though she knew exactly what the woman meant. Not her academic background, which was impeccable. Not her extracurricular activities, which demonstrated leadership and initiative. No, your background was code, and Amelia was fluent in that particular dialect. I'm interested in investment banking, she had said firmly, and that's what I'll be pursuing. She'd graduated summa cum laude anyway, despite the professors who seemed surprised every time she excelled, despite the study groups that somehow never had room for her, despite the subtle and not-so-subtle messages that she didn't belong. It continued in her first job at Morgan Stanley, where clients would look past her to the white male associates, assuming they were in charge. Where she'd been mistaken for the secretary, the assistant, the coffee girl. Where she'd learned to arrive early, stay late, and work twice as hard for half the recognition. Could you grab us some coffee while we wait for the meeting to start? A client had asked her once, not bothering to look up from his phone. She had been preparing to present a complex financial analysis that she'd spent weeks perfecting. I'd be happy to show you where the coffee station is, she had replied with a professional smile. But I'll need to prepare for my presentation. I'm leading this morning's discussion on the proposed merger strategy. The client had looked up then, surprised, embarrassed, but not quite apologetic. Oh, I assumed. Well, never mind. She'd been promoted 3 times in 4 years anyway. Each advancement met with the same mixture of surprise and rationalization from her colleagues. Diversity initiative, they'd whisper, filling a quota. Never acknowledging that she was simply exceptional at her job, that she consistently outperformed her peers, that she brought valuable insights and strategies that improved the company's bottom line. And now, at First Capital, where she'd risen from loan officer to branch manager to regional director to executive vice president in just 6 years, where she'd implemented the bank's first comprehensive diversity training program, where she'd established new metrics for equitable lending practices and customer service standards, where she'd fought for changes in hiring and promotion policies to create pathways for talented individuals from underrepresented backgrounds, and where, apparently, she still couldn't withdraw her own money without being treated like a potential criminal. Inside Patricia's office, Amelia sat straight-backed in the visitor's chair, declining the offer of coffee or water. She didn't want refreshments. She wanted answers. She wanted accountability. Patricia perched nervously on the edge of her desk, hands clasped in front of her, looking less like a manager and more like someone awaiting sentencing. "Ms. Richardson, I want to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Amelia interrupted, her voice measured and calm. "Let's be very clear about what happened out there. Your teller took one look at me and decided I didn't match his mental image of someone who should have access to that amount of money. And instead of treating me with the same respect and professionalism that you would treat any other customer, you both chose to embarrass me in front of an entire lobby of people." Patricia's face flushed. "That's not exactly—" "It's exactly what happened," Amelia said firmly. "And we both know it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. It was a habit she'd developed early in her career, documenting everything, keeping meticulous records, never relying solely on memory when bias could so easily distort how her words and actions were interpreted by others. "Did you know that First Capital has had 17 complaints filed against this branch in the past year, specifically related to discriminatory treatment?" 17. That's more than any other branch in our entire Northeast network. Patricia's eyes widened. "I wasn't aware." "You should be," Amelia said, her tone sharp but controlled. "As branch manager, these complaints cross your desk first. They're submitted through our customer feedback system, and branch managers receive automatic notifications. And yet, not a single one has been escalated to regional oversight. Not one has resulted in any documented corrective action. They've all been marked resolved with no follow-up." Patricia swallowed hard, the color draining from her face as quickly as it had appeared. "We take all customer complaints seriously." "Do you?" Amelia flipped through the notebook where she had compiled data from across the bank's branch network. Janet Williams denied a mortgage application despite a 780 credit score and income well above the qualifying threshold. Marcus Johnson asked to move to a different teller because the one he approached was about to go on break at 10:30 in the morning when no breaks are scheduled. Sophia Diaz told that her check would need to be held for 7 business days despite being drawn on an account at this very bank. Amelia closed the notebook. All black or brown customers, all treated differently than their white counterparts, all complaints dismissed or minimized, all handled by your branch under your management. Patricia's face had gone pale. I didn't see the pattern." "You didn't look for one," Amelia corrected her, "and that's the problem." She stood up, smoothing her jeans. The casual clothes that had seemed so suspicious to Brandon and Patricia now served as a stark reminder of how appearance could override all other factors in how a person was perceived and treated. "I'm not here to fire you, Miss Winters. That would be easy, and it would change nothing. One person leaves, another takes their place, and the system continues unchanged." Amelia walked to the window overlooking the lobby, where business had resumed, but the atmosphere remained charged. Employees were moving with exaggerated professionalism. Customers were still whispering among themselves, and Brandon was serving his next customer with a deference that bordered on obsequiousness. "I'm here to fix the system, and you're going to help me do it." Patricia blinked in surprise. "I am. Yes." Amelia turned back to face her. "Because I think you're not a bad person. I think you're a product of a banking culture that has deeply embedded biases, and I think you're smart enough to recognize that and work to change it." She took her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling an emergency meeting of the executive leadership team. 2 hours from now at headquarters. You'll be there. So will Brandon. So will every employee who interacts with customers at this branch. We're going to have a very frank conversation about what happened today and what happens next." Patricia nodded slowly, the color returning to her face. Whether it was relief at not being fired on the spot or genuine remorse for what had transpired, Amelia couldn't tell. but the woman's demeanor had shifted from defensive to something approaching receptive. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and for the first time since their interaction began, there was no condescension in her tone. Only acknowledgement of Amelia's authority, an authority that should have been respected regardless of her appearance or position. "And Patricia," Amelia paused at the door, "bring those 17 complaint files with you, all of them." As Amelia walked back through the lobby, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Employees who had been watching the scene unfold earlier now averted their eyes or nodded respectfully. Customers who had witnessed her treatment now watched with newfound interest as she passed. She stopped at Brandon's window on her way out. He looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and shame. "Ms. Richardson, I am so sorry." 2 hours, Mr. Wells," she said quietly. "Headquarters, bring your employee handbook. We'll discuss your understanding of our customer service protocols then." Outside on the busy downtown street, Amelia finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar weight of exhaustion, the kind that comes not from physical exertion, but from the constant mental taxation of navigating spaces where your very presence is questioned. She checked her watch. 11:05 a.m. Nearly an hour had passed since she'd first stepped into the bank. She still had time to make it to the property closing, but first she had calls to make. She dialed the first number as she walked to her car. "Eric? It's Amelia. I need you to clear the executive conference room at 1 p.m. Yes, I know about the quarterly planning session. This takes priority, and I need HR there, the whole team. This isn't a drill, Eric. This is exactly the situation we've been preparing for." She ended the call and slid into the driver's seat of her Tesla, the one purchase she'd allowed herself when she received her last promotion, not for status but for the simple pleasure of occasionally watching people's faces when she unlocked it in parking lots. The same people who would follow her through department stores assuming she couldn't afford the merchandise. The same people who would seat her near the kitchen in restaurants, assuming she wouldn't leave a good tip. The same people who made 1,000 tiny judgments every day, based on nothing more than the color of her skin. As she pulled away from the curb, Amelia glanced back at the bank's imposing facade. First Capital had been founded in 1892, its granite columns and marble floors speaking to old money, tradition, stability. For much of its history, people who looked like Amelia hadn't been welcome there, except perhaps to clean the floors after hours. Now she was about to use that same institution to spark real change, not through anger or public humiliation, but through the same system that had tried to exclude her. She smiled slightly as she navigated through traffic. Sometimes the most effective revolution wasn't the one that burned everything down. It was the one that rewrote the rules from the inside out. The call had gone out like a thunderclap through the executive offices of First Capital Bank. Emergency meeting, all senior leadership, mandatory attendance, Amelia Richardson presiding. In the 6 years since Amelia had joined the company, she had called exactly 2 emergency meetings. The first during a potential data breach that threatened customer information. The second when a regional competitor had attempted a hostile takeover. Everyone knew that Amelia Richardson did not use the words emergency or mandatory lightly. Her reputation for calm, measured leadership made these rare departures from her usual style all the more notable. By 12:45 p.m., the executive conference room on the 42nd floor of First Capital Tower was filling up. Men and women in expensive suits, carrying tablets and leather portfolios, speaking in hushed tones as they selected seats around the massive mahogany table. The room offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a daily reminder of the power concentrated in this space. Eric Donovan, Amelia's executive assistant, was stationed at the door, checking names against an attendance list and distributing a thin folder to each person as they entered. Eric had worked with Amelia for 4 years, having followed her from her previous position when she was promoted to EVP. He was fiercely loyal and exceptionally competent, qualities Amelia valued above all others in her close colleagues. "What's this about?" James Peterson, the chief financial officer, asked quietly as he accepted his folder. James was in his early 60s, one of the old guard, who had initially been skeptical of Amelia's rapid rise but had come to respect her after seeing her results. "Ms. Richardson will explain everything," Eric replied, his expression neutral but his tone suggesting that this was not a meeting anyone would want to miss. At 12:57, Patricia Winters and Brandon Wells were escorted into the room by building security. They looked painfully out of place among the executive team, Patricia clutching a thick binder of files, Brandon tugging nervously at his tie. Neither had ever been to the corporate headquarters before, let alone the executive floor. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Branch managers did not attend these meetings. Tellers certainly did not. Something unprecedented was happening, and the executive's curiosity was palpable. At precisely 1 p.m., Amelia Richardson entered. She had changed from her casual clothes into a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her natural hair now arranged in a professional updo. The transformation was striking, from the woman who had been questioned at the bank to the executive whose authority was unquestionable. But the transformation wasn't just in her appearance. There was a shift in her energy, her presence. This was Amelia in her element, commanding, authoritative, unquestionably in charge. "Thank you all for being here on short notice," she began, taking her position at the head of the table. Her voice was strong, clear, and carried easily to every corner of the large room. "Today I experienced something that I believe requires our immediate attention." Over the next 10 minutes, Amelia recounted exactly what had happened at the downtown branch. She was methodical, precise, unemotional, stating facts rather than interpretations. She described Brandon's initial suspicion, Patricia's condescending intervention, the public questioning of her identity and intentions. She detailed the way the situation had only changed when her position within the bank was discovered. When she finished, the room was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. Several executives glanced uncomfortably at Patricia and Brandon, who seemed to be trying to disappear into their chairs. "I recognize that some of you might view this as an isolated incident," Amelia continued, her voice measured. "A single branch, a single teller, a single manager making poor judgments. But I am here to tell you that it is not isolated, it is systemic." She gestured to the folders that had been distributed. "Open these, please." Inside each folder was a detailed report. Customer satisfaction metrics broken down by race, gender, and age. Loan approval rates with the same demographic breakdowns. Wait times at teller windows. Call center response patterns. Account hold frequencies. Every conceivable customer interaction meticulously analyzed and presented in clean, undeniable charts and graphs. And the patterns were undeniable. "For the past 18 months, I have been quietly conducting a comprehensive audit of our customer experience practices," Amelia explained, her voice steady as the executives flipped through the pages of data before them. "What you're looking at is statistically significant evidence that First Capital Bank systematically treats customers differently based on their racial background." She used a remote to bring up additional slides on the room's large display screens. The data showed that Black and Latino customers waited an average of 12 minutes longer for service than their white counterparts. They were 3.7 times more likely to have additional verification requested for routine transactions. Their loan applications took 22 days longer to process on average. they were 5.2 times more likely to be denied for products they qualified for based on objective criteria. "This isn't about individual racism," Amelia said clearly, making eye contact with various executives around the table. "This is about institutional bias that has become embedded in our culture and practices. It's in how we train our people, how we measure success, how we structure our reward systems. It's in our policies, both written and unwritten." She looked directly at Patricia and Brandon, who seemed to be trying to sink further into their chairs with each new slide of damning data. "What happened to me today was wrong. It was humiliating and discriminatory, but it's also a symptom of a much larger problem, and fixing it requires more than disciplining two employees who were, in many ways, simply following the unwritten rules we've allowed to flourish." Charles Morgan, the CEO, cleared his throat. At 62, he represented the old guard of banking, traditional, conservative, resistant to change. He had been at First Capital for nearly 4 decades, rising through the ranks in an era when banking was even more homogeneous than it was today. His silver hair and custom suits projected an image of stability that shareholders appreciated, even as the industry evolved around him. "Amelia," he began, his deep voice carrying the weight of his position, "while I don't doubt your experience was unfortunate, I'm not sure we should be making sweeping changes based on an emotional reaction to one incident." There it was, the dismissal Amelia had anticipated, the framing of her concerns as emotional rather than factual, despite the meticulously gathered data in front of every person at the table. It was a tactic she had encountered throughout her career, a way to diminish the legitimacy of her observations and recommendations. Amelia didn't miss a beat. "This isn't emotional, Charles. It's data, and it's not one incident." She nodded toward Patricia. "Ms. Winters has brought with her 17 customer complaints from the downtown branch alone, all alleging discriminatory treatment, all dismissed without meaningful investigation. 17 complaints that never made it past her desk to reach the attention of regional management or our customer advocacy team." Patricia reluctantly slid the binder across the table. Morgan glanced at it but didn't open it, as if touching it might somehow imply acceptance of its contents. "Even if there are issues to address," he said carefully, measuring his words, "I'm not sure a public approach is wise. The potential for reputational damage is precisely why we need to act decisively and transparently," Amelia finished for him, refusing to let the conversation be redirected toward protecting the bank's image rather than addressing the underlying problems. "Because if we don't address this ourselves, someone else will do it for us, and they won't be as concerned with protecting the bank's future as I am." She opened her laptop and turned it toward the room. On screen was a social media post from earlier that morning. A customer had captured video of Amelia's interaction with Brandon and Patricia, recording it discreetly from the waiting area. It hadn't gone viral yet, but it had been shared several hundred times in just a few hours. The caption read, "Watch how First Capital Bank treats black customers trying to access their own money. Time to close my account." Banking while black, a murmur ran through the room. Several executives exchanged alarmed glances. In an age of instant communication and social accountability, incidents like this could spiral rapidly, causing irreparable damage to the bank's reputation and bottom line. "This could have been much worse," Amelia said, closing the laptop. "The video doesn't show my position or the resolution, but the next one might, or the one after that. How many viral videos of discriminatory treatment can our brand withstand before we face boycotts, class action lawsuits, federal investigations? How many customers will we lose Not just black and brown customers who experience this treatment directly, but also socially conscious customers of all backgrounds who choose to bank elsewhere when they learn how we operate. Charles Morgan's face had grown increasingly grim as Amelia spoke. He was a banker through and through, and while he might resist acknowledging the moral implications of the data before him, he couldn't ignore the potential financial implications. Discrimination wasn't just wrong, it was bad for business. "What are you proposing?" he asked finally, his tone suggesting reluctant engagement rather than enthusiastic support. Amelia smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I'm glad you asked." She pressed a button on the conference room console, and the wall screen illuminated with a presentation titled Project Transparency: Rebuilding Trust Through Accountability. "I've developed a comprehensive plan to address these issues at every level of our organization," Amelia explained, her voice taking on the energetic tone she reserved for ideas she was passionate about. "It will require significant changes to our policies, our training, our incentive structures, and our leadership approach. It won't be easy or comfortable, but it is necessary, not just morally, but financially." For the next half hour, Amelia outlined her plan in meticulous detail. It was clear this wasn't something she had thrown together in the hours since the incident. This was a strategy she had been developing for months, perhaps years, waiting for the right moment to implement it. The plan included mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees, conducted by external experts rather than in-house HR staff, revision of all customer service protocols to eliminate subjective decision-making and replace it with clear, objective criteria, anonymous transaction testing to identify problematic branches and employees, similar to secret shopper programs, but focused specifically on equitable treatment, creation of a dedicated customer advocacy office with direct reporting to the executive team, bypassing branch management for discrimination complaints, quarterly public reporting of key service metrics, broken down by demographic categories, publicly available on the bank's website for total transparency, revision of performance evaluations to include equity measures, making fair treatment as important as sales targets and efficiency metrics, a formal review process for all customer complaints, alleging discriminatory treatment with mandatory escalation beyond the branch level, establishment of a community advisory board comprised of leaders from diverse communities served by the bank. "Implementation begins immediately," Amelia concluded, her voice firm and confident. "I've already contacted the necessary external partners. Training will start next week, beginning with the downtown branch." She glanced meaningfully at Patricia and Brandon, whose expressions had shifted from embarrassment to something closer to thoughtful attention as they listened to her plan. Charles Morgan leaned forward, fingers steepled before him in his characteristic thinking pose. "This is extensive. The cost alone will be less than what we'd pay in legal fees and settlements if we do nothing," Amelia finished, anticipating his objection. "Not to mention the incalculable cost to our reputation and customer base if we continue to alienate entire communities." She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each executive in turn. Some looked intrigued, others concerned, a few openly resistant. Change was never easy, especially in an institution as traditional as First Capital. "I'm not asking for permission to implement this plan," Amelia said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "As EVP of Operations and Customer Experience, this falls squarely within my authority. I'm informing you out of professional courtesy and because I expect your full support." The message was clear. This was happening with or without their blessing. Morgan's jaw tightened momentarily, but he recognized the political reality. Opposing Amelia's plan would position him on the wrong side of history, and potentially on the wrong side of shareholder interests if the discrimination issue escalated publicly. "Of course you have my support," he said finally, his tone not quite matching his words. Then, glancing around the table and apparently reading the room, he amended, "Our support." The other executives nodded, some more enthusiastically than others. Amelia turned to Patricia and Brandon, who had remained silent throughout the presentation. "As for the two of you, you'll be the first to undergo the new training program. Your continued employment will depend on your active participation and demonstrated improvement." Brandon nodded quickly, relief evident on his face at the prospect of keeping his job. Patricia seemed to be processing everything more slowly, her expression unreadable as she took in the magnitude of what was happening. "Ms. Winters," Amelia continued, her tone professional but firm, "I'll be personally reviewing all 17 complaints from your branch. We'll discuss appropriate remediation for those customers next week. I expect you to be prepared with suggestions for how your branch can make things right with each individual." Patricia nodded, her voice barely audible as she replied, "Yes, Ms. Richardson." Amelia checked her watch. 2:17 p.m. She had missed her property closing. She'd have to reschedule, explain the situation to the seller. One more small inconvenience in a day full of them. One more adjustment she had to make because someone else couldn't see past her skin color, but perhaps the last one. At least at First Capital Bank. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, gathering her materials. "You'll all receive detailed implementation timelines by end of day. I expect your teams to give this their full attention and resources." As the executives filed out, many stopping to express their support or ask clarifying questions, Amelia remained at the head of the table, reviewing her notes. She was aware of Charles Morgan lingering, waiting until they were alone. It was a predictable move. He wouldn't voice his true thoughts in front of the others. "You've been planning this for some time," he said finally, when the last executive had left. It wasn't a question. Amelia looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes. You could have brought these concerns to me directly," he said, a hint of reproach in his tone. "We could have handled this more discreetly." There it was, the suggestion that had Amelia simply gone through proper channels, through him, the situation could have been managed quietly, without disruption, without forcing the bank to confront its uncomfortable truths. She regarded him steadily. "Could we? 3 years ago, I suggested implementing basic bias training for customer service representatives. You told me it wasn't a priority. 2 years ago, I raised concerns about demographic disparities in loan approvals. You said the data was inconclusive. Last year, I proposed creating a diversity and inclusion officer position. You said it was unnecessary." Morgan had the grace to look uncomfortable as Amelia recounted these previous attempts. Times were different. "No, Charles, the times were exactly the same." Amelia's voice was quiet but powerful. "The only thing that's different is that now I have the authority to make these changes without your approval, and concrete evidence that they are necessary." She closed her laptop and stood. "I believe in this bank. I believe in what we could be, but we can't move forward until we acknowledge our failings and take concrete steps to address them." Morgan nodded slowly. "You're right, of course." He paused, regarding her with a mixture of admiration and wariness. "You know, when we promoted you to EVP, some of the board members were concerned you were too young, too progressive for such a traditional institution." "And what did you tell them?" Amelia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. He smiled slightly, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "That they were underestimating you, and that if they continued to do so, it would be at their own peril." "Smart man," Amelia replied, returning his smile with one that was equally measured. As she gathered her things, Morgan added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to you today. It shouldn't have. Amelia looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words, searching for the sincerity behind them. No, it shouldn't have, but I'm not sorry it happened to me instead of someone else, someone without the power to change things. She walked to the door, then turned back. The real test isn't how we treat people we think are important, Charles. It's how we treat people when we don't know who they are. With that, she left, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor as she headed toward her office. There was still much work to be done. The first ripples of change began almost immediately. By 5 p.m. that same day, an all-staff email had gone out from Charles Morgan himself, announcing project transparency and emphasizing the bank's renewed commitment to equitable service for all customers. The email was carefully worded, acknowledging opportunities for improvement without directly admitting to past discrimination, a compromise Amelia had accepted for the sake of moving forward quickly. The corporate communications team worked through the night drafting press releases, updating the website, and preparing social media announcements. By morning, First Capital was being cautiously praised for taking proactive steps to address potential bias in its practices. First Capital sets new banking industry standard for transparency, read one financial news headline. Major bank acknowledges potential racial bias, implements sweeping changes, declared another. The stock price dipped slightly in early trading, a reflexive response to the unexpected announcement, then stabilized as analysts noted that the bank's proactive approach might actually strengthen its position long-term by heading off potential regulatory scrutiny and expanding its customer base. But the real work was happening behind the scenes, where Amelia had assembled a task force to begin implementing the changes outlined in her plan. The downtown branch was temporarily closed for 3 days of intensive training, with customers redirected to nearby locations. A carefully worded sign on the door explained that the branch was undergoing staff development to better serve our diverse community. Brandon Wells and Patricia Winters found themselves in a conference room with diversity consultants, customer service experts, and legal advisors. They were joined by every employee from their branch, from the newest teller to the security guard who had witnessed Amelia's treatment. The training wasn't punitive or accusatory. There were no shame tactics or public confessions. Instead, it was educational, introspective, and solution-oriented. Employees were taught to recognize unconscious bias, understand its impact on customer experiences, and develop concrete strategies for ensuring equitable treatment. For Brandon, it was a humbling experience. He had never considered himself racist. He had black friends, listened to hip-hop, had even dated a woman of color in college. But sitting in that training room, reviewing case studies and data, he began to see patterns in his own behavior that he had never recognized. "I think I've been operating on autopilot," he admitted during a group discussion on the second day, "making snap judgments based on appearance without even realizing I was doing it." The facilitator, Dr. Keisha Williams, a respected expert in organizational psychology, nodded encouragingly. "That's an important insight, Brandon. Unconscious bias operates below our awareness. That's what makes it so insidious. But becoming aware of it is the first step to changing it." "I always thought I was just being thorough," he continued, speaking more to himself than the group. "Following protocols, protecting the bank. But when I look at who I was thorough with..." He trailed off, the implications of his own behavior becoming clear to him, perhaps for the first time. Patricia's journey was more complex. As a branch manager who had worked her way up through the ranks over 20 years, she had deeply ingrained ideas about how banking should work. The training challenged her fundamental assumptions about risk assessment, customer verification, and what constituted suspicious behavior. "I always thought I was protecting the bank," she said quietly during a one-on-one session with a trainer. I never stopped to question why certain customers triggered my concern while others didn't. That's actually quite common, the trainer replied. We all absorb messages from our environment, from media, from colleagues, from society. Banking has historically been a very white, very male industry. The mental image many people have of a typical banker or a typical banking customer reflects that history. Patricia nodded slowly. I grew up in banking. My father was a banker. My first boss looked like every banker in every movie. Older white man in a suit. I guess I internalized more than just professional standards. By the end of the 3 days, both had gained new perspective. Not complete transformation, that would take time and continued effort, but a beginning. A crack in the foundation of assumptions they had built their careers upon. Meanwhile, Amelia was addressing the 17 customer complaints that had been dismissed. She personally called each customer, apologized for their experience, and invited them to meet with her to discuss appropriate remediation. Janet Williams, the woman who had been denied a mortgage despite exceeding all qualifications, was skeptical when she received Amelia's call. Why should I believe anything will change now? She asked, her voice tense with the memory of her humiliating experience. I've already found financing elsewhere. I understand your skepticism, Amelia replied, recognizing the justified wariness in the woman's tone. But I'd like the opportunity to show you that we're serious about making things right, not just for you, but for all our customers. After some hesitation, Janet agreed to meet. They sat in Amelia's office the following week, Janet still guarded but willing to listen as Amelia outlined the changes being implemented. We've reviewed your original application, Amelia explained, sliding a folder across her desk. Based on your credit score and income verification, you should have been approved immediately for our premium mortgage product with preferred interest rates. Janet looked at the documents, which showed clearly that she had exceeded all qualification requirements. The loan officer told me my income was unstable, she said, the bitterness still evident in her voice. I've been at the same company for 12 years. I've received regular promotions. My income has only increased. There was no legitimate reason to deny your application, Amelia acknowledged, and we want to make that right. When Amelia offered to have the bank cover the difference in interest rate costs between Janet's current mortgage and what First Capital should have offered her, amounting to over $30,000 over the life of the loan, Janet was stunned. This isn't about buying your silence, Amelia explained. It's about acknowledging the real financial impact of our mistake and taking responsibility for it. Discrimination has tangible costs for those who experience it. We believe in making people whole. Similar conversations took place with the other 16 customers. Some, like Janet, were receptive to making amends. Others had already closed their accounts and wanted nothing more to do with First Capital. Amelia respected their decisions either way. For those willing to give the bank another chance, she created a special customer advocacy program. Each would be assigned a dedicated representative who would oversee their banking needs and ensure they received exemplary service. Additionally, they would be invited to participate in quarterly feedback sessions to help the bank continue improving. Your negative experience was a failure on our part, Amelia told each of them. But if you're willing, your insights could help prevent similar failures in the future. By the end of the week, word had spread throughout the banking community. Other financial institutions were watching First Capital closely, some with concern that they might face similar scrutiny, others with interest in potentially adopting similar initiatives before they found themselves on the defensive. Amelia received calls from executives at 3 competing banks, all asking essentially the same question: How bad was the problem really? Was this level of response necessary? Ask yourself this, she told them. If your own EVP couldn't withdraw money without being treated with suspicion, what's happening to your everyday customers? What experiences are people having at your branches that never make it to your desk? What business are you losing without even knowing why? The question lingered uncomfortably in the air each time. None had a good answer. On Friday afternoon, as Amelia was preparing to leave for the rescheduled property closing, Eric appeared at her office door. "Brandon Wells is here to see you," he said. "He doesn't have an appointment." Amelia looked up in surprise. The training had concluded the previous day, and she hadn't expected to hear from Brandon until their scheduled follow-up the following week. "Send him in." Brandon entered cautiously, as if stepping into a lion's den. He was dressed more casually than he had been at the bank. Jeans and a button-down shirt rather than his usual suit. He looked different somehow. Less rigid, more authentic. "Ms. Richardson," he began, then stopped, seeming to recalibrate. "Amelia, I wanted to thank you for not firing me on the spot, for giving me a chance to learn and do better." Amelia gestured for him to sit. "Everyone deserves that chance, Brandon," he nodded, looking down at his hands. "The training this week, it opened my eyes to things I never noticed before. Things about myself, about how I treat people. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary." "Growth rarely happens in comfortable spaces," Amelia observed. "I keep thinking about how I treated you that day," Brandon continued. "How quickly I made assumptions. How I never even considered that you might be, well, you." "But that's just it," Amelia said gently. "It shouldn't matter who I am. Whether I'm the EVP or a cashier at the grocery store or unemployed, I deserve to be treated with the same respect as anyone else making a legitimate transaction." Brandon nodded slowly. "I understand that now, or I'm starting to." He took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about my future at the bank, about whether I can be part of the solution after being part of the problem for so long." "And what have you decided?" "I want to try," he said simply. "I want to be better. Do better. I'm not sure how yet, but I know I can't just go back to business as usual." Amelia studied him thoughtfully. His contrition seemed genuine, not performed for her benefit, but emerging from genuine self-reflection. She'd seen enough false apologies in her career to recognize the difference. "Have you heard of our community banking initiative?" she asked. Brandon shook his head. "It's a new program we're launching next month. We're opening micro branches in underserved neighborhoods, focusing on financial education, first-time homebuyer assistance, small business loans, that sort of thing." She leaned forward slightly. "We need people who understand the importance of this work, people who have recognized their own biases and are committed to overcoming them. It would mean a lateral move for you, possibly even a step down in terms of prestige, but it could be an opportunity to be part of meaningful change." Brandon's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. I'd like to learn more about that." "I'll have Eric send you the information," Amelia said. "Think about it over the weekend. This isn't charity, Brandon. It would be challenging work, but it might also be the most rewarding work you've ever done." After Brandon left, Amelia sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on their conversation. Transformation wasn't quick or easy. It required both accountability and opportunity, both consequences and second chances. The genuine change she'd seen in Brandon over just a few days gave her hope for the larger transformation she was trying to create at First Capital. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about the property closing. She gathered her things, ready to finally complete the transaction that had started this whole chain of events. As she walked through the executive floor toward the elevator, She passed Charles Morgan's office. He was on the phone but waved her in when he saw her. "I'll call you back," he said to whoever was on the line. Hanging up, he turned to Amelia. "Just the person I wanted to see. The board called an emergency meeting this morning." Amelia tensed slightly. "About Project Transparency?" "Among other things," Charles confirmed. "There was concern about the cost, the potential for negative publicity, if we're seen as admitting to discriminatory practices, the usual resistance to change." "And?" Amelia asked, already calculating her next move if the board was pushing back. Charles smiled, surprising her. "And I told them that any attempt to undermine or dilute this initiative would result in my immediate resignation, along with, I suspect, yours and several other key executives." Amelia blinked in surprise. "That's not what I expected you to say." "You're not the only one capable of growth, Amelia," he said with a wry smile. "I've been in banking for 40 years. I've seen the industry resist every meaningful change, from technology to regulation to diversity. And every time, that resistance has cost us in talent, in opportunities, in public trust." He leaned back in his chair. "I may be old school, but I'm not a fool. What you're doing isn't just morally right. It's good business, the kind of leadership that will keep First Capital relevant for the next century." "Thank you for your support," Amelia said, genuinely touched by his unexpected advocacy. "Don't thank me yet," Charles replied. The board also discussed another matter, my retirement. Amelia's eyebrows rose. "You're retiring? When?" "Within the year," he said, watching her reaction carefully, "which means we need to start thinking about succession planning." He gave her a meaningful look. "Charles, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," he said, raising a hand to stop her. "But I will be watching Project Transparency very closely. Its success or failure will say a lot about the future leadership needs of this bank." Amelia nodded slowly, understanding the implicit message. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system anymore. It was about potentially taking the reins of the entire institution, about having the opportunity to reshape First Capital from the very top, to ensure that the changes being implemented now would become permanent features of the bank's culture. "No pressure?" Charles added with a slight smile. "None at all," Amelia replied dryly. As she finally left the building, Amelia felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what she had accomplished so far, determination to see it through, apprehension about the challenges still ahead, and something else, something that felt surprisingly like hope. 6 months later, Amelia Richardson stood at the podium in First Capital's largest branch, surrounded by reporters, community leaders, and bank employees. Behind her, a large screen displayed real-time customer service metrics, broken down by demographic categories, branch locations, and service types. "Today marks a significant milestone in our journey," she began, surveying the crowd of journalists, community activists, banking industry representatives, and First Capital employees who had gathered for this public unveiling. 6 months ago, First Capital Bank committed to unprecedented transparency in how we serve all customers regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic background. We promised accountability, measurable improvement, and regular public updates. She gestured to the screen behind her. "This dashboard is now live on our website, updated daily. Anyone, customers, community members, regulators, even our competitors, can see exactly how we're performing against our equity goals." The data told a compelling story. Wait times had equalized across demographic groups. Verification requests were now consistent regardless of customer background. Loan approval rates showed no statistically significant disparities when controlling for relevant financial factors. "We're not perfect," Amelia acknowledged, her tone humble but confident. We still have work to do, but we've made meaningful progress and we've created systems to ensure that progress continues. She introduced several key initiatives that had emerged from Project Transparency: a customer advisory council with representatives from diverse communities, which met monthly to review service data and suggest improvements; a partnership with 3 historically Black colleges to create banking career pathways, including scholarships, internships, and mentoring programs; a microloan program for small businesses in underserved neighborhoods, which had already funded 50 new enterprises in areas previously neglected by traditional banking; revised hiring practices that had already increased staff diversity by 22%, bringing new perspectives and experiences to the bank at every level; a complete overhaul of training programs for all customer-facing positions, incorporating the lessons learned from the pilot program at the downtown branch. As she spoke, Amelia noticed familiar faces in the audience. Patricia Winters, now working in the training department, helping other branch managers identify and address potential bias in their operations. Brandon Wells, thriving in his new role at a community micro branch in a predominantly Black neighborhood, where his enthusiasm for financial education had made him unexpectedly effective at connecting with community members. And in the back, standing quietly but clearly present, Janet Williams, Marcus Johnson, Sophia Diaz, and several other customers whose complaints had once been dismissed. They had accepted Amelia's invitation to witness this milestone, to see for themselves whether the bank's promises were being kept. After the formal presentation, as attendees mingled and explored interactive displays showcasing the bank's initiatives, Amelia made her way through the crowd to speak with each of those customers personally. "Thank you for coming," she said to Janet Williams. "I know it couldn't have been easy to walk back through these doors." Janet nodded, her expression guarded but no longer hostile. "I was skeptical. I'm still skeptical, if I'm being honest. But what you're doing here—" She gestured to the dashboard displays, the diverse group of employees, the community partnership information. "It's a start, a real one." "That's all it is," Amelia agreed. "A start." As the event wound down, Charles Morgan approached her, accompanied by 2 board members she recognized: Eleanor Fitzgerald, who had been an early supporter of Project Transparency, and Richard Chen, who had initially been skeptical but had come around as the data began showing positive results. "Impressive presentation," Charles said. "Very impressive data." "Thank you," Amelia replied. "But the real test will be sustaining this progress long term, making these changes permanent rather than temporary initiatives." "About that," Charles said, glancing at the board members, "we'd like to discuss next steps, specifically the succession plan we talked about." Amelia understood immediately. "How soon?" "Sooner than originally planned," Charles admitted. "The board is enthusiastic about the direction you've taken the bank. They are interested in accelerating the timeline." Eleanor Fitzgerald stepped forward. "What Charles is dancing around, Ms. Richardson, is that we'd like to formally offer you the position of CEO-elect with a transition period of approximately 3 months. Amelia kept her expression professional, but her heart raced. Chief Executive Officer of First Capital Bank, the first woman, the first person of color, a position from which she could cement the changes she'd begun and introduce others that hadn't yet been possible. "I'm honored," she said carefully, "and I'd be interested in discussing it further, but I'd need assurances about continuing the work we've started." "Of course," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "That's precisely why we want you in this role. The results speak for themselves, not just in terms of equity, but in business performance." It was true. Since implementing Project Transparency, First Capital had seen a 17% increase in new account openings, Customer retention had improved dramatically, with fewer people closing accounts and more expanding their relationship with the bank. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, and turnover had decreased significantly. Even the stock price had responded positively, up 12% over 6 months, in a market that had only grown by 3%. "We'll need to discuss details," Amelia said. "Specific commitments, board support, strategic priorities." "Absolutely," Charles agreed. "We'll set something up for next week. In the meantime," he smiled slightly, "you might want to start thinking about who could fill your current position." As they walked away, Amelia stood alone for a moment, taking in the scene around her. 6 months ago, she had been denied a simple transaction because someone took one look at her and decided she didn't belong. Now she was being offered the opportunity to lead the entire institution. But this wasn't a story about personal vindication. It was about system change, about creating a bank where what happened to her couldn't happen to anyone else, regardless of their title or position. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her real estate agent, sending a photo of the property she had finally purchased after the delayed closing. A historic building in a gentrifying neighborhood, which Amelia planned to convert into affordable housing units and a community financial education center. "Renovation permits approved," the message read. "We can start work next week." Amelia smiled. One transaction had led to so much change, both personal and institutional, and there was still more to come. Later that evening, Amelia sat in her office, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows as dusk settled over the skyline. She was reviewing the final reports from the day's event when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Eric, holding a small package. "This just arrived for you," he said, placing it on her desk. "Special delivery." The package was wrapped in simple brown paper with no return address. Curious, Amelia opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of a woman in 1960s clothing, standing proudly in front of a small house. With it was a handwritten note on First Capital Bank stationery from decades past. "Ms. Richardson, you don't know me, but I've been following the changes at First Capital with great interest. The woman in this photograph is my grandmother, Dorothy Jenkins. In 1963, she became the first black teller at First Capital Bank. She faced discrimination daily, from customers who refused to let her handle their money, from colleagues who wouldn't eat lunch with her, from managers who scrutinized her every transaction. She stayed for 27 years, believing that her presence was opening doors for others like her. When she retired in 1990, she was still the only black person in a management position at her branch. She passed away last year, but I wanted you to have this photograph. I think she would have been proud to see you leading the bank toward the future she always hoped for. One where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from. Thank you for your courage and persistence. Sincerely, Michael Jenkins." Amelia traced her finger gently over the photograph. Dorothy Jenkins stood straight-backed and dignified in her bank uniform, her expression serious but with a hint of determination in her eyes. A pioneer who had faced far greater obstacles than Amelia ever had, who had persevered without the power or position to make systemic changes. She carefully placed the framed photo on her desk, positioning it where she would see it daily. A reminder of those who had come before, who had made her path possible through their quiet courage and endurance. Then she turned back to her computer and continued working on her CEO transition plan. There was still so much to do, so many systems to reimagine, so many barriers to break down. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, the weight of that responsibility felt more like purpose than burden. Because she wasn't doing it alone. She was part of a continuum, from Dorothy Jenkins to whatever young person might someday sit in her chair, looking at her photo and drawing inspiration from her story. The most profound changes rarely happened in dramatic confrontations or grand gestures. They happened in the quiet, persistent work of reshaping systems from within, in policies rewritten, metrics redefined, assumptions challenged, opportunities created, and sometimes they began with something as simple as a person being denied a transaction and deciding that the problem wasn't just about them, but about everyone who might come after. 1 year to the day after Amelia Richardson had walked into the downtown branch of First Capital Bank, she stood behind a different podium. This one was in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, where the American Bankers Association was holding its annual leadership conference. She had been invited to deliver the keynote address. Following the official announcement that morning, Amelia Richardson had been named CEO of First Capital Bank, becoming the first woman and first person of color to lead the 130-year-old institution. The audience was a sea of banking executives, industry leaders, and financial journalists. Among them were Charles Morgan, now settling into retirement, Patricia Winters, recently promoted to Director of Training and Development, Brandon Wells, who had found his calling in community banking, and Janet Williams, who had not only returned to First Capital as a customer, but had recently joined the Customer Advisory Council. Amelia stepped up to the microphone, surveying the room with quiet confidence. The journey that had brought her to this moment had been long and challenging, filled with obstacles both visible and invisible. But standing here now, she felt a profound sense of purpose that transcended personal achievement. "A year ago today," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I walked into a bank branch to make a withdrawal. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. My hair was in a simple bun. I had no makeup on. I looked like an ordinary person going about an ordinary day." She paused, letting the image settle in the minds of her audience. "I was treated with suspicion, with disrespect, with the clear message that I didn't belong there, not because of anything I had done, but because of assumptions made based on my appearance, because I didn't look like someone who should have access to the amount of money I was trying to withdraw." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Most had heard the story by now. It had become something of a legend in banking circles, but hearing it directly from Amelia herself gave it new power, new immediacy. "I could have handled that situation in many ways," she continued. "I could have revealed my position immediately, used my authority to punish those involved, and moved on. I could have taken my business elsewhere and never looked back. I could have gone public with what happened, created a PR nightmare for the bank, and watched from the sidelines as damage control took over." She shook her head slightly. But none of those responses would have addressed the real problem, because what happened to me that day wasn't about me. It was about a system that allowed, even encouraged, such treatment as standard practice. Amelia looked out at the assembled banking leadership, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Many of you have approached me this weekend to congratulate me on my appointment as CEO. Some have called it historic, some have called it inspirational, some have called it overdue. But I want to be clear about something. My story is not exceptional because of what I achieved despite the obstacles. It's exceptional because I had the power to change the obstacles themselves." She let that sink in before continuing. "For every person like me who has the position, the authority, or simply the persistence to challenge discriminatory treatment, there are thousands who don't, who walk away, who internalize the message that they don't belong, who never return to our institutions, who tell their friends and family to stay away too." Amelia's voice grew more passionate, though her delivery remained measured and professional. "The true measure of our institutions is not how we treat people we recognize as important. It's how we treat people when we don't know who they are, when they don't fit our mental image of value or belonging, when they come to us without titles or credentials or signs of wealth that make us automatically extend respect and courtesy. She detailed the changes First Capital had implemented over the past year, the measurable improvements in customer experience across all demographic groups, the positive impact on the bank's bottom line. She shared stories of customers who had returned to banking after years of avoiding financial institutions due to previous negative experiences. She described the innovative programs they had developed to serve communities that had historically been underbanked or excluded entirely. This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that should be reason enough, she emphasized. It's about building sustainable, profitable institutions that truly serve all communities. It's about recognizing that diversity and inclusion aren't just buzzwords for HR departments. They're essential business strategies in an increasingly diverse society. As she concluded her speech, Amelia issued a challenge to the industry leaders before her. I invite each of you to walk into one of your own branches, dressed as an ordinary person. Don't announce who you are. Don't make a special appointment. Just walk in and try to conduct a transaction. See how you're treated. Then imagine how someone without your title, your connections, or your recourse might feel receiving that same treatment. She paused, letting the challenge hang in the air. Because at the end of the day, banking isn't about marble lobbies or complex financial instruments or quarterly earnings reports. It's about people trusting us with their money, their dreams, their futures. And that trust is earned not through marketing campaigns or mission statements, but through the actual experience of every customer who walks through our doors. The applause when she finished was thunderous, not the polite, obligatory applause of industry conferences, but the genuine response to words that had struck a chord, that had named truths rarely spoken in such forums. As Amelia stepped away from the podium, she was immediately surrounded by executives eager to speak with her, to congratulate her, to probe further about First Capital's initiatives. But over their shoulders, she caught sight of Janet Williams standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, nodding slightly with a small smile on her face. That, more than any industry accolade or executive praise, told Amelia that the work she had begun was truly making a difference, not just for those at the top, but for those who had previously been left outside. Later that evening, Amelia sat alone in her hotel room, scrolling through messages of congratulation from colleagues, friends, and family. But one email caught her attention differently than the others. The subject line read simply, "Thank you for seeing me." The message was from a teller at a small First Capital branch in a rural community. "Dear Ms. Richardson, you don't know me, but your story changed how I do my job every day. After our training on equitable customer service, I started paying attention to my own assumptions about the people who come to my window. Last week, a young man came in wearing clothes that I would have previously judged as unprofessional. Before your initiative, I might have treated him with subtle suspicion or extra scrutiny. Instead, I treated him exactly as I would any other customer. He was there to deposit his first paycheck from a new job. He told me he'd been nervous about coming to the bank because of negative experiences in the past, but he left smiling, saying he felt respected and valued. It was a small interaction. He'll never know how differently I might have treated him a year ago. But I know, and it matters. Thank you for making First Capital a place where we're all learning to see people more clearly and treat them more fairly." Respectfully, Emma Larson. Amelia read the email twice, then set her phone aside, moved by the simple testament to change happening where it mattered most, in the daily interactions between bank employees and customers. This was the real transformation, not the policy documents or the training manuals or the metrics dashboards. important as those tools were. The real change was in moments like the one Emma described, in assumptions questioned, in dignity preserved, in trust built one transaction at a time. Amelia walked to the window of her hotel room, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, people were making decisions about which bank to trust with their money, their hopes, their futures. Some of those people looked like her, some didn't. All deserved the same respect, the same service, the same opportunities. A year ago, she had walked into a bank branch and been judged unworthy based on appearance alone. Today, she was CEO of that same bank, with the power to ensure such judgments no longer determined who received service and who didn't. It wasn't a perfect ending. The work was far from complete. Biases didn't disappear overnight. Systems didn't transform in a year, but it was a beginning worth celebrating, a tangible shift in the right direction, and sometimes that was enough. Not the destination, but the knowledge that the path forward was clear and that others would continue the journey even when her part was done. Amelia turned away from the window and began preparing for the next day's meetings. There was still so much to do, so many systems to improve, so many minds to change, so many opportunities to create. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had already been accomplished. A small victory in the larger battle for a more just, more inclusive financial system. A reminder that change was possible, even in the most entrenched institutions. All because she had walked into a bank, been denied service, and decided that the problem wasn't just about her, but about everyone who might come after. In the weeks and months that followed her appointment as CEO, Amelia continued to build on the foundation laid by Project Transparency. She instituted a mentorship program that paired promising employees from underrepresented groups with senior executives. She established a venture fund specifically targeted at minority-owned businesses in the bank's service areas. She expanded the community banking initiative to include mobile banking units that served rural and inner-city neighborhoods with limited access to traditional branches. She also made structural changes to ensure the sustainability of these initiatives beyond her tenure. Diversity and inclusion metrics were built into executive compensation packages. Customer experience surveys were redesigned to better capture the experiences of all demographic groups. The bank's board was gradually reconstituted to better reflect the communities it served. And most importantly, Amelia made it her mission to identify and nurture the next generation of leaders, individuals who shared her vision of a financial system that worked for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status. One of those individuals was Amara Johnson, a brilliant young loan officer from the downtown branch who had caught Amelia's attention during a town hall meeting. Amara had asked challenging questions about the bank's community reinvestment strategies, demonstrating both a deep understanding of banking regulations and a passionate commitment to serving underbanked communities. "You remind me of myself at your age," Amelia told her during their first one-on-one meeting, "except you're starting from a much stronger position. You don't have to hide your intelligence or downplay your ambition to make others comfortable." "That's because of people like you," Amara replied. "You changed the environment so that someone like me could be heard." Amelia smiled. "And someday you'll do the same for someone else. That's how progress works. Each generation building on the foundations laid by those who came before." It was a sentiment Amelia returned to often as she navigated the challenges and opportunities of leadership. She kept Dorothy Jenkins' photograph on her desk, a daily reminder of the shoulders she stood on, and beside it, she placed a simple framed quotation that had become something of a mantra for her. "True leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge." That philosophy guided her approach to both the bank's customers and its employees. It informed her decisions about everything from interest rates to parental leave policies. It reminded her daily that her position wasn't just about personal achievement, but about using her power and influence to create a more equitable world. 2 years into her tenure as CEO, First Capital was recognized by industry publications as both the most diverse and the most profitable mid-sized bank in the country, a combination that silenced critics who had suggested that focusing on equity would hurt the bottom line. Amelia was invited to speak at financial conferences, business schools, and policy forums, sharing the bank's journey and the lessons learned along the way. The question isn't whether we can afford to create more inclusive financial institutions, she would tell these audiences. The question is whether we can afford not to. In a diverse society, businesses that exclude or marginalize entire communities are leaving money on the table. They're limiting their customer base, their talent pool, and ultimately, their potential for growth. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success came in the form of the everyday interactions that took place in First Capital branches across the country. Interactions where customers of all backgrounds were greeted with the same respect, offered the same opportunities, treated with the same dignity. Interactions where no one ever again had to hear the words, "You don't look like someone who'd have this kind of money in their account." Have you ever been judged based solely on appearance? Have you witnessed others receiving different treatment because of how they looked? These moments of casual discrimination happen daily across America, often invisible to those not directly affected. But Amelia Richardson's story reminds us that true change doesn't always come through confrontation or public shaming. Sometimes the most powerful revolution happens when someone with the authority to make changes chooses to use that power to create systems where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or what they wear. What would our world look like if every institution examined its practices this way? If every leader walked anonymously through their own organization to experience it as others do? If metrics for success included not just profit margins, but equitable treatment for all? These aren't just questions about banking. They're questions about the society we want to build together. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to see more stories of justice served through systematic change rather than individual punishment. And remember that sometimes the most effective response to discrimination isn't just standing up for yourself. It's changing the system so others don't face the same barriers. Because in the end, dignity shouldn't be a privilege for the powerful. It should be the right of everyone who walks through the door.